Howdy, howdy, Sue Devil here, and welcome to our look at the middling units between rank 23 and rank 6 of 601 to 900 gold. We've done the top 5, we've done the bottom 5. Now it's time to look at the rank order of the units that were in the middle. And as a reminder, I also have a primer video which goes over how I did the testing, all of the data, and exact examples of what I did, so that anyone who wants to see that can. And it's always I always like to remind people that who are new to this is that this is one way of evaluating units, one set of testing. This is not the end-all and be-all. It's one piece of the puzzle so that you can have a little bit more information in your toolkit to help evaluate units. And this is just looking at infantry units in an infantry fight, and that's it. And we looked at 3 different types of units and tried to find the value of those units in that fight. So we'll go over and go from rank 23 to rank 6, and nothing else left to say, so let's get going. We're going to start with rank 23 from the vampire counts at 850 gold is the Karen Wraith. Now Karen Wraiths, actually I had 2 people who picked this out in the comments that expected Karen Wraiths to be very low, and you guys were absolutely right. Karen Wraiths are actually quite weak, which really they shouldn't be. I know they do cause fear and terror, so they are sort of a cheap way to have terror in your lineup, but they can be countered pretty hard with magic, so they're kind of a high risk reward unit. They are armor piercing and they're pretty quick. They have a lot of advantages in that they have 75% physical resistance, but they don't do too great in an infantry fight. Now, understand that the testing itself does skew these units, these ethereal units or units that do magic damage, down a little bit because they went up against dwarf warriors and dwarf hammers, which have a natural resistance to magic. So you can imagine that Karen Race would be a little bit further up the line against other units in general, but to come in this low, I mean, they really didn't do that great against even the clan rats, and they have no magic resistance. You'd think they'd do amazing against clan rats because they have fear and terror. Didn't do that great. So this was a unit that I think a few of you were expecting to see down here at the very bottom, and they just stayed out of the bottom 5, which really they should be doing a little bit better, even though some of the units they fought against in the testing had magic resistance. Alright, going on to rank 22. The Lizardmen at 800 gold, the Saurus Spears with shields. Now, again, this is something I talked about with the top 5, where the Saurus Warriors with shields were ahead of the Saurus Warriors, and the Saurus Spears were in the bottom 5, and the Saurus Spears with shields are not in the bottom 5, they are above. And this is another example. They're getting 6 extra stat points for 50 extra gold, plus they get a shield. There is no reason to ever bring Saurus Spears. And I know they recently got buffed, like Saurus Spears and Saurus Warriors both got a buff, and this is where you would expect generally to see them. Spears should not be that great in an infantry fight, but Saurus Spears should do a little bit better than Saurus Spears with shields. That shield should have some cost to it because it does defend you against missile fire. Alright, moving on to number 21. Still sort of the bottom half of this list is the Dark Elves at 650 gold, the Black Ark Corsair. Now the Black Ark Corsair does, and Witch Elves, Dark Elves in general do have a bit of a disadvantage in this style of testing. It's worth knowing because they don't get their murderous prowess. So that doesn't proc, so they don't get that 90 seconds of extra stats. So they do show up a little lower than really they will perform in an actual battle. But they are showing up pretty low. Now, the thing is, they didn't do that great against the clan rats, which I would have expected them to do fantastic, because they're not armor piercing, they are anti-infantry, and they're a pretty decent little unit from the look of their stats. And they're even across the board. They do even against hammers, dwarf warriors, and clan rats. They're a general all-arounder, but not that great. Maybe you put their murderous mastery or murderous, get their faction buff, maybe they do a little bit better. But they're not going to get into sort of the top half of this list. They might make it to the middle, I would think. Alright, moving on. Coming in at number 20 is the Witch Elves from the Dark Elves at 800 gold. Now, Witch Elves are actually a very strong unit in certain situations. And this is one of those units that really is situational. The Black Ark Corsair is just sort of meh all around. It's not as good as you would think it would be. The Witch Elves can be extremely good in some situations. Like, Witch Elves against Dwarf Warriors did very good. You know, pulled up positive value. They're you know, got them off the field pretty fast. They got the clan rats off the field pretty quick, though they didn't pull that much gold against them. You know, they can do pretty good, and Witch Elves have the amazing ability to cause things to rampage, which is fantastic. So they really do have a place in builds, and that's sort of a theme in this 601 to 900 gold. There are units that, I mean, this is such a strong set of units to test. There are very few. Well, I don't even know if I would say there are any really bad units. Like, I think the Karen race is a bit of a stinker because they should do a little bit better. But, you know, even though Forsaken were in the bottom 5, you know, against some units, they are extremely good. They really do have a niche use. And, you know, I would say the Savage Orc Big Guns are definitely OP because they're so good in the infantry fight, yet they are anti-large. There's a few little wonky units, but there's nothing truly awful in this whole set. And most of these units do have a place, and the Witch Elves do. I mean, Witch Elves just, they are a decent unit, and they really do have very clear uses, although they are a bit vulnerable. All right, moving on. Coming in at number 19, and this is a unit that was recently nerfed by 25 gold, and that is from Bretonnia at 675 gold, and that's the Footsquire. Now, previously I've done analysis on Footsquires and White Lions and Longbeards with great weapons, Chaos Warriors great weapons, and Footsquires I did note back when they were, I think, 700, they were overpriced and they did not perform very well. They brought them down to 650, and they've brought them back up to 675. Now, I don't know if they should actually be there. I think they must be really close. You know, I think they were correctly priced at 650, but obviously CA has access to stats and data that I don't have, and maybe they should be sort of in the bottom half of this list. I will say something about the Footsquires is they trade up reasonably well, but they trade down quite poorly, which is to say that they actually did really good against the Hammerers. They did very good for their cost against Hammerers, yet they did quite poorly against the Clan Rats. So they really trade up quite nicely, and they trade down quite poorly. So maybe looking at that 650 gold, they were trading up a little too well, because really that's what they are going to be trading up. But they are going to be trading up a lot because Bretonnia doesn't have any really better infantry than Footsquires. That's sort of their peak infantry, and maybe they just didn't want them trading up too good, or they're making too much of an impact and pulling away from sort of classic Bretonian knight builds. So I don't know, maybe they're rightly priced and valued right here, coming in at number 19 out of 28. They're not a bad unit. I think it's 650. They've sort of been in number 11 or 12. I would guess they'd be sort of top 10-ish. And, you know, I don't think the nerf was needed, but I don't have the stats that CA has. All right, moving on to number 18 from Chaos at 850 gold is the Chaos Warriors with Halberds. Now, this is a really good comparison. This is exactly to explain sort of the stratification that I talk about. Like, there's no way a Chaos Warrior with Halberds should be better in an infantry fight than a Footsquire that has armor-piercing anti-infantry. But here they are. You know, they're only slightly better. It's very, very close. But they perform, the Chaos Warriors with Halberds would perform quite good. And Chaos Warriors at all levels, the Chaos Warriors great weapon is the number one, and the Chaos Warriors Halberd is their, you know, they have four Chaos has 4 units and 3 Chaos Warrior units up in here, and they're all good. And this lineup probably is a little bit OP, looking at where everything is showing up, but the Chaos Warriors with Halberds, you know, reduce their stats, give them a bigger bonus versus large, problem solved. They come in an infantry fight sort of down in the bottom. You know, maybe they come in number 22, 23, 24, but against large, they're just as good or even better, and that makes a little bit more sense. Obviously, that's how I sort of evaluate these things, that you shouldn't, you know, not that you have to pick between Footsquires and Chaos Warriors with Halberds, but you would think intuitively that a Footsquire is going to be better in an infantry fight than a Chaos Warrior with Halberds. and that's how it should line up. I know Chaos has excellent infantry, and Bretonnia isn't supposed to have outstanding infantry, so there is sort of a separation there, and that is a reasonable separation to have. But I think Chaos Warriors with halberds are just a little bit high on this list for me. But there they are. That is what they are. That is what it is, and that's why we do the testing. All right, coming in at number 17 from the Tomb Kings is at 750 gold, the Tomb Guard. Now, Tomb Guard with halberds coming in the bottom 5, and the Tomb Guard is coming in sort of halfway up, and this is about where they should be, because you got to remember the Tomb Kings can heal, and they do have the faction heal and the Ushapti summon. You know, I would expect sort of undead units to always be sort of their best undead units to sort of be about halfway up the list, and Tomb Kings, the Tomb Guard for the Tomb Kings are showing up here, and this is a strong list of units. So the Tomb Guards are doing pretty good. They're a good unit, and you do see them pretty frequently. They often make sort of the core of the quote-unquote heavy hitting infantry. Obviously they do a pretty decent job in that backline, and you know, they do have a lot, they can benefit from a lot of the Tomb Kings like faction heals and healing and stuff like that. They're a pretty decent little unit, and I think that's about where they should be. You know, coming in at number 17 out of 28, pretty decent. All right, coming in at number 16 from the Dowie at 750 gold, the Longbeards with great weapons. And this is an interesting sort of position where I see the Longbeards with great weapons, and we know that they're sort of a better backline unit, better an anti-large unit, and they are pretty poor in an infantry fight. Turns out that they are the exact opposite of the Footsquire. The Footsquires trade up quite nicely, but trade down very poorly. Longbeards with great weapons trade down very well, but they trade up extremely poorly. And you'll see this, like against the Skaven, the Longbeards with great weapons did excellent. They did decently against the Dwarf Warriors, and they did awful against the Hammers. You know, not awful. They did pretty poorly though. Really, where they shine, the Longbeards with great weapons, is when they're trading down, and that is the exact opposite of the Footsquires, where they shine is trading up, and that's kind of an area where I think really Dowie infantry should always be top half at the very least, and because Dowie rely on their infantry like no other faction. The next closest faction I would say in terms of relying on infantry might be Chaos or Vampire. You know, Vampire counts maybe, I don't know. They rely on different, they have a lot of magic that can make up a lot for a lot of things. They have good lords. The Dowie need their infantry, and the Longbeards with great weapons really need to be a little bit better, although they are decent against cavalry. Alright, coming in at number 15, we're just about halfway, from Norska at 750 gold, the Marauder Berserkers. Interesting that they showed up here at sort of halfway. I thought they would have showed up a little bit higher. They're reasonably priced. They have a good mechanic. They can do a ton of damage. They did very good against the getting the clan rats killed quickly, though they took a lot of damage in return. You know, they're I think, you know, they're an interesting all-around unit, and they're amongst a lot of really great units. So is this where they should show up? Almost exactly halfway? Maybe. I know they're really they're sort of a niche unit in that they don't have a lot of armor, but they do a lot of damage. Very interesting, I think. As far as Norska, I don't think you're ever going to bring a Norskin build where you bring Marauders and you're going to be super sad you brought them, unless you're bringing them in a silly way against a faction that's going to mow them down from range. But yeah, Marauder Berserkers, I would have thought they'd been a little bit higher, but coming in at number 15. Alright, coming in at number 14, exactly halfway, exactly in the middle, from the Greenskins at 800 gold, the Orc Big Guns. Now, the Orc Big Guns is a good all-around unit, and you're looking at the unit it's sitting around, you know, Footsquires, Tomb Guards, Longbeards with great weapons, Marauder Berserkers. You know, this is an anti-large unit, and they're showing up halfway up the list. Again, easy fix here, I think, is you give them a much bigger anti-large bonus, and you reduce their stats in some way, shape, or form, and that sort of stratifies them correctly. But turns out, as it is, I think Savage Orc Big Guns are amazing. Orc Big Guns are pretty good too, and they do serve a bit of a different function because Orc Big Guns have a little bit more armor. A little bit. They have armor where Savage Orc Big Guns don't. And they actually, I did do some testing a long time ago when I played the Greenskins in a tournament, and so I did some testing, and Orc Big Guns and Savage Orc Big Guns do have sort of different niches where the Savage Orc Big Guns are better all around, and the Orc Big Guns can do better in some situations. But at number 14 out of 28 in an infantry fight, really this is the Greenskins are have lots of good infantry, and this is just another case where if you make a mistake bringing big guns when you don't come against any large, they're going to still do just fine. And they are definitely, I would say, overpowered for what they are, and that could be easily fixed. Bigger anti-large bonus, less stats, job done. All right, coming in at number 13 from the Vampire Coast at 850 gold is the Sirens. Now this is exactly where, kind of where I would have thought, where I would think Karen race should be about. Everything about this Karen race and the Sirens looks like it should make them similar, but that I think it's -9 melee attack is the aura that they give. It's just a game changer. Like the Sirens, they do so much better against the clan rats, against against everything. And this is about where I would expect a unit like this to be, is sort of halfway up, in that they are a big risk versus reward unit, and that they are very vulnerable to magic damage. But they're a super cool unit, and I like seeing them. And you do see Vampire Coast builds with Sirens periodically, 1 or 2 or 3 units of Sirens, and they can do pretty decently. They are a good little unit, and they perform reasonably well. The only risk is if they're brought against a faction that has the tools to really deal with them with magic. Alright, moving along, coming in at number 12, 750 gold from the Vampire Counts are the base Graveguard. Now, Graveguard in general is a good little unit. You do see them very frequently. They make the core of many Vampire Count builds. They're a very reliable, robust unit. They get their value. They're good at clearing trash, though they don't do it very quickly. They do it very economically, and they deserve to be in the number 12 place, sort of this halfway up. And they have lots of other things that make them good. So the Graveguard, 750 gold, number 12, a solid all-around unit for the Vampire Counts. All right, moving along to number 11, one out of the top 10 from the Dowie at 650 gold, my beloved Longbeards. Now, Longbeards, I've said many times, are the gold standard for what a defensive unit should look like. And it is interesting to see, because you don't get to use things like Encourage or like the old Grumblers or the stuff like that in this testing. But the Longbeards, just the base Longbeards, finished number 1 in the gold differential against Dwarf Warriors. They finished number 2 in the gold over the amount of time they spent over gold spent against the Hammers, and they finished number 1 in the overall value pulled against the Clan Rats. So they really are doing what I expected, in that they are really the gold standard for defensive infantry. Now they fall a little bit short because they don't kill things very fast. They take a long time to die, but they don't kill things very fast. They just hold and hold and hold and hold. Anyone who watches my channel or plays the Dowie and uses the Longbeard know that. They just hold. They just don't quit fighting. They have 80, I think it's 80 leadership, and they will keep fighting. They're an amazing unit, and finishing just out of the top 10 in this pantheon, this grouping of 601 to 900 gold, when really I always say they're the gold standard of defensive units, is saying that this 601 to 900 gold tier is packed full of awesome units. And it really is. You look at some of the units we've gone past already, they're already good. Like, Marauder Berserkers are a cool unit. Tomb Guards are solid. Foot Squires, they're actually not too bad. But Witch Elves, even in the very bottom, Slayers, Forsaken, there's a lot of good units in this set of 601 to 900 gold, and the Longbeards are doing their thing, and this is why I love the Longbeards. Finishing in, they have a stat out of the three, they finished number 1 against the Dwarf Warriors, number 2 against the Hammers, and number 1 in one stat against the Clan Rats. And they're all the defensive stats, or the total value, the gold differential gained, which is fantastic. And that's why I love the Longbeards. And the testing shows they do what I say, like in terms of the total value is amazing. Like really they pull lots of value. When I say they finished number 1 against the Dwarf Warriors, it is in the total value pulled. 179 gold. Fantastic. Pulled a lot of value against the Dwarf Warriors. When I say they finished number 2 against the Hammers, that is the gold per second. That means how long did they stay in that fight versus how much it cost to stay. They finished number 2. Who finished number 1? Interestingly, number 1 was the Halberdiers from the Empire. They stayed in there a very long time, 132 seconds. Anyways, and against the Clan Rats, they finished number 1 in the total gold differential, the amount of value. So the Longbeards just pull value. They are an extreme high value unit, but they don't do it quickly. That's always the problem, right? They'll last forever. They don't, but just don't kill things very quickly. All right. Going away from my favorite unit in the entire game, the Longbeard, onto number 10, cracking the top 10 from the vampire counts at 900 gold is the Graveguard with great weapons. And these Graveguards, great weapons, and Graveguard and type of units have been tweaked back and forth a little bit from over time. Are they about where they belong? I don't know. They're probably a little bit high. And for any vampire count player, don't jump on me, because I think the Graveguard and Graveguard great weapons are probably a little higher up on this list than they should be, because they have these other things, like they don't break, they cause fear, they can be healed very easily, so they should give up a little bit. Like I would think, and I've said this in my other videos, is that the undead units should never really be above halfway on these lists, because there's a lot of other positive factors to using undead units that you don't and can't get with other units from other factions. So they're probably slightly high at number 10. Really, I would, to say that they should be in the bottom half, to say they should be, between probably 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. So they're not that much higher than I think they should be, but they're overperforming for sure. And I would say if you play the vampire counts are an incredible faction right now in terms of what they can do with in multiplayer. And Graveguard with great weapons, and Graveguard being at the top of this list in the key portion of infantry is, I think, an important reason, because Graveguard and Graveguard with great weapons are never going to let you down. They're just going to perform, and you're seeing that. There's other reasons why vampire counts are so good right now, but this is one of them for sure. All right, moving along to number 9 in the top 10 from Chaos at 750 gold, the base Chaos Warrior. The base Chaos Warrior is a really solid unit. You don't see Chaos Warriors very often. You really don't, because Chaos Warriors with great weapons are so good. There's just very rarely a reason to bring base Chaos Warriors, but if you ever need to bring them, they're solid. They will pull value. They'll get the job done. They pulled excellent value against both the Dwarf Warriors and the Clan Rats, and they held out a reasonable amount of time against Hammers. They're a good all-around unit at 750 gold. They get the job done if you need them to be if you need something to plug up and sort of a defensive spot. They're going to get the job done at 750 gold. All right, moving on to number 8. I would say this is a bit of a surprise from this unit, because I've heard them maligned quite a bit, but turns out they're pretty solid, and that is from the Skaven at 750 gold, the Plague Monk. Now, they have some pretty decent stats. They're anti-infantry. They really do a lot of damage, and they actually did pretty good against the Hammers. As far as the total value that they pulled, and compared to the other units, they did pretty good. They were very level all around. Plague Monks are a good all around unit in infantry against anything. Any other infantry, I would say they're generally, well, that's not quite true. They have very, very low armor, so they're vulnerable. They can be beaten by Forsaken, which is interesting because they have no armor. But they're generally decent unit. Where they're super vulnerable is to quarrelers, archers and this sort of thing, where anywhere you can take them out from range, they are very vulnerable. And they're very vulnerable to high DPS units like your Forsaken and like your Saurus Warrior, stuff like that. But if they're allowed to go to work, they'll go to work. That is, they really will get the job done for you if you can get them in there. I think they are sort of a classic support unit. You bring 2 of these into a build, where you want to punch through the line and support clan rats up front. They can do the job. And I would love to hear from anyone who plays this game. And do you, what matchups do you find them to really good in, and where have you used them? Because it looks like they're pretty decent, coming in at number 8, and they're a solid unit all around. Anyways, moving along to number 7. From the Wood Elves at 800 gold is the War Dancer. War Dancers don't have armor piercing, but they are an anti-infantry. Again, another one of these units that's quite vulnerable in that they don't have armor, but they can get a lot of work done if you let them go to work. They really can clear out trash pretty quickly. They do pretty good. They trade up and trade down well. War Dancers are like the Plague Monks in that they're good all-arounders. It doesn't matter. They can do good against just about everything. And the big caveat to that is they're vulnerable to missile fire, I think. But other than that, I mean, I was surprised that they finished so high, and that's just fine. Like, the Wood Elves should have some units that can do some damage. They are sort of the glass cannon, quote unquote, faction, in that they have a lot of units that are vulnerable in one way or another, but they can get a ton of damage done, and the War Dancers fit right in with everything else, and they are a solid unit at 800 gold for the Wood Elves. All right, moving into number 6. The last unit that didn't get picked for the top 5, the first unit on the second page, the the best scholarship that wasn't Harvard. We are talking from the Empire at 900 gold is the Greatsword. Greatswords are a solid unit. Now, they've tweaked them up and down a little bit. In game 1, Greatswords were ridiculous. They were absolutely ridiculous how good they were, and they recently, I think they were 950, they brought them down to 900. They made a few other little tweaks, and they're back to being an outstanding unit. This is really a very strong unit, and should they be up here? I don't know. Empire is one of those factions. They are a very high skill cap faction because you can bring a lot of different builds, and they have a lot of units that can get the job done when needed. Greatswords, they can be a little vulnerable to armor-piercing missiles, but they're just good all around. I mean, they get the job done, and coming in at number 6, should they be there? I don't know. I would say they should not be in the bottom half. They need to be in the top half. They are a specific anti-infantry unit. Yeah, probably should be sort of in around here. And they're a solid unit, and they do a good job, and you're seeing them more and more. And I think part of the Empire, part of the Greatswords being up in here where they should be, has been part of the resurgence of Empire as a faction that can be played very well. And you do see Empire in tournaments. You see them doing very well. Again, super high skill cap faction. In that the better a player you are, the more you're going to get out of Empire. And one of the reasons our Greatswords are a solid unit in at that 900 level. And, they do a good job. So, anyways, that is the list. Number 23 to number 6. A few units that I would say you could talk about their positioning. The Karen Race are probably a little bit weak. Sour Spears with shields should be a little bit down further. Maybe Foot Squires might be a little bit better. Chaos Warriors with halberds should probably be a little bit down. Orc Big Guns a little bit down. Graveguard and Graveguard with great weapons, maybe a smidge down. Sirens, maybe a smidge down, but they're pretty good. You look at where these things should fit. You know, I think I'll talk about that in my last video discussing these things. I think I'll give these first three some time to get some comments, so I really do look forward to comments on these units where you think they do belong, or if you think, you know, this is pretty much you expected the units to be there. I did see some comments, and thank you for those people that sort of took a guess and said, I bet you this unit will be here, this will be unit will be there, because it's very interesting. I think the next set of units, the next set of testing I do, I'm going to first make a video of my guesses, and so that we can all sort of go through this together, because it's really fun. It's really fun to guess where you think the units would be and then look at what the testing actually reveals. And yeah, like I said, I did hear the Karen race would be down near the bottom, and sure enough, here they are. And someone said the Graveguard with great weapons they thought would be up here, and that surprised me. But yeah, sure enough, they're sort of getting near the top of this list. And you know, again, the caveats are this isn't the end all and be all of testing. I think the Karen race and Sirens being up against Dowie units with magic resistance sort of skewed their results down a little bit, and Witch Elves and Black Ark Corsairs, because they don't get their murderous prowess, sort of skewed their results down a little bit. But I think it's easy enough to understand why, and that they would be a little bit better if you put them back in the list. So would absolutely love to hear from you. Always request comments, because that's the best part of doing this, is having that back and forth and reading your comments and looking at how other people are thinking about these same units, so that I can learn a little something. And you know, it spurs lots of extra testing, and it's just very interesting. So I definitely look forward to your comments down below. And with that said, I will see you soon.